Welcome to SAR Studios Inside the Issue. Today's guest is Tom Sokolowski, whose story Victory Pose is featured in the spring 2024 issue of Southern Indiana Review. Tom Sokolowski completed an MFA at the University of Central Florida, where he was awarded a Provost's Fellowship. He's currently a PhD candidate at Florida State University, and his fiction is featured or forthcoming in Southern Indiana Review, the Barcelona Review, Shenandoah, and elsewhere. A veteran of the Florida Army National Guard, Tom lives in Tallahassee. Tom, welcome to Inside the Issue.
How's it going? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great. I'm excited. You're the first one of this round, so I'm excited to.
Okay.
So before we get going, I definitely want to hear about the story and kind of what the genesis of it was. But would you mind reading a little bit from the opening for us?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
So I'm just going to read from the very start. Right. Victory Pose. Julian and I were back squatting at Amir's when I first saw Taya. She leaned on the front counter with a duffel sling, wearing fingerless gloves, a baggy tank, and Adidas leggings, those statuesque quads and calves tapering to camouflage Converse. Amir offered Taya a free workout, and she toward the floor, her unwound wrist wraps flailing with each head-swiveling step. Clearly, Taya wasn't anyone's client. This was early last year after my engagement ended, basically. The exact chronology is a bit more complex, but that's how it felt. Taya appeared immediately after Nora's vanishing act. Amir's gym was a dungeon in an old warehouse sandwiched between Mr. D's Collision and Raja's, a gas station turned Indian restaurant near University Square, a part of Tampa where rent was college priced. Other than a couple retired old heads, every guy there was training to go pro, a bunch of gorillas, clunking dumbbells, clinking rust-speckled plates, flexing in spider-webbed mirrors below massive dust-carpeted speakers blaring, say, Cannibal Corpse or Slayer, maybe Death Grips. Taya ignored everyone. She pushed the leg press with a fist, continued to the dumbbell, squeezed the 120s like she wanted to crush them to powder. She had this jaw-clenched smile like she'd finally found a wrench in a toolbox that would just work good enough. Julian inched from the Gage's hooks, 5 plates making the bar nearly parabolic against his shoulders. Ahead, near the mirror, his phone sit on the stupid fucking tripod he carried around, filming for TikTok. Julian was always asking me to take part in the nonsense. He went down slow, knees perfectly stable, and came up slower with a grunt. Then, with the weight noisily racked, he asked me again, "Seriously, you won't get on my shoulders for a rep?" His face was flamingo flushed, neck veins penciled thick. "Do me a favor." "Fuck, man," I said. "Never." I had no interest in entertaining children.
All right, thanks. I really like that opening because it introduces our major players in the story. And, pretty classically, we've got sort of stranger comes to town, right? Taya is this new person who comes in, and, our attention is on her. And we've got the stuff with the TikTok that comes back later in the story. So I think it's just a really masterful opening that it introduces all those things in a really short amount of time. And for me, I love being dropped into like a world that I don't know anything about. And I totally bought it. It's we're dropped into this world of competitive weightlifting, or at least the training for competitive weightlifting, or bodybuilding, I'm sorry. So where did this story come from? You mind telling us?
Yeah, this story is actually it's pretty interesting for me. I actually wrote this during a class here at Florida State. It was a literature class, not a creative writing class. It was a class on decadent literature, so a lot of things in the vein of like, gosh, if I can have any thoughts, Baudelaire, if I can remember. Right. So this story kind of started as a germ from thematics, which normally when I write, I really think you kind of need to just forget about theme. I don't think I ever consider theme when I try to write anything. Right. I think starting with a situation, I don't even know if I have characters in mind. Maybe it's more of a situation and a voice, and I go from there. But with this one, it was written for this class, and it was, a creative aspect of the project connected with like a critical component, kind of breaking down, how it's connected to decadent literature. Um, and that was a weird process for me. So really, I mean, this was written, gosh, it's been 3 years since I had the first draft, and I do kind of remember this decadent stuff pretty well, which means it's not a complete bullshit. I'm like, oh yeah, this is stuff I really loved. So I had a list of themes that I looked at in this critical paper I wrote 3 years ago, and it was like uh, the story explored. I argued artificiality, loneliness, isolation, mentorship, collections, drug use, sexuality, um, you know, violence. And those were kind of the main ones. There's some other stuff which I think I kind of just finagled into the argument, but yeah. So I mean, I was trying to write this story which satisfied this weird, kind of late-ish stage capitalism themes that you see in decadent literature, like the picture of Dorian Gray, where you have somebody who's really almost like idle and kind of rich and just gathering wealth and gathering objects from other cultures, jewelry, whatnot, and they're dissatisfied and lonely, and they're really having gender, uh, maybe not crises, but gender exploration, gender weird play with gender. And I just thought, bodybuilding would be a cool place to put that in a contemporary story.
Yeah, I mean that's actually I it makes perfect sense, right? After having read the story a bunch of times, thinking about the artificiality and isolation, sexuality, drug use, and just and even the I hadn't really thought about it until you just mentioned it, but the gender play of it, particularly with
Mm-hmm.
Taya, and I mean, and just the way that I mean, obviously Taya, there's an element of sexuality to her being on OnlyFans and all of that, but just her, um, you know, her shape, her body, how big she is, and how I don't know. That's
Mm-hmm.
just really that's great
Yeah.
too, that the story came. I mean, because I think you're right. I don't think any writer. I mean, I tell students almost daily, you know, not to be thinking about theme at all. And I tell them, and I don't know if they believe me or not, but I tell them like I quite literally don't know what my stories are about. I don't think in terms of that, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
like you,
Yeah.
it's about character and situation, or voice or any number of things, but it's never like I'm going to write a story about artificiality and isolation.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Kind
And
of amazing it came out.
yeah, it is, I think well, I honestly think decadent literature is such a broad uh thing that can be kind of toyed with today. I mean, the themes are just so, I don't know, they're fun and they're so broad, that I think when I first wrote the draft, I was trying to fit things in for this class, and it kind of probably messed up the first draft. And as class is done, trying to edit over the summer, I just made a story.
Yeah.
But the skeleton is there. I'm remembering the Yellow Book is what I was trying to think of. I'm just trying to think of the Yellow Book and Baudelaire. The Yellow Book was this publication by Oscar Wilde, was like the main guy basically making the Yellow Book. It was like a magazine. The details are not fresh, but there's a lot of stories that were published in there, and a lot of them were definitely playing with this idea of, like a dandy male character, male protagonist encountering a very masculine woman, and the power dynamic was flipped, and that was really fresh for this, late 19th century literature. And those stories were really cool. I think really what I took from them was I just stole names. Like I think Theodora Fragment is a story from the Yellow Book, and then there's another story where a character's the woman who leaves him, or he leaves the woman. The relationship breaks up. The character's name is Nora. So I like, you know, those are more like Easter eggs for my professor I wrote it for. And I was like, okay, here, this is very fun for you. But I mean, I love the stories, and they were just great crafted stories where they were just you got characters fighting and interacting from page one, paragraph one. It goes, so
Yeah, and I mean, I don't hope this isn't, I don't mean for this to be like disrespectful of like bodybuilding, but that strikes me as like very decadent,
yeah, for sure,
sort of
right? It's
decadent
such a weird.
vocation or um and yeah, it's just that fits really cool or fits really well. So as I mentioned before, we're dropped into this world. I mean, is this a world that you were familiar with, or did you do research, or I mean, because like not only the weight room stuff that part works great, but especially when we get later to like I mean, I'm not asking if you've used steroids, but we get into like the steroid stuff, and it's very, there seems to be, I don't know, it just struck me as really really authentic. And maybe you totally made it all up and but it
No,
worked.
no, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I mean, I've never taken steroids.
I didn't mean,
Never,
I
never
wasn't trying
had
to
the
get that question, but yeah.
never been uh maybe financially set or brave enough to what I mean, experiment. I'm not that interesting of a person. But yeah, I mean, like the exercise stuff, I've that's been a hobby of mine. I try to, I don't know, I'm not I don't like running and doing things that are too difficult. So like weightlifting, where it's like I can pick something up 6 times and put it down and rest for 2 minutes and listen to a song. That's always been fine. Good for the mental health. So setting wise, that was easy. Like I've seen places where I can just kind of write from memory something I've seen. The nitty gritty like steroid stuff. I was just reading Reddit, honestly, a lot of Reddit, and I basically I told my wife, we were then dating, and I told her, I was like, hey, if you see like weird stuff on the computer, I'm basically going through the process of buying steroids and doing the research for this imaginary person. So yeah, I was reading Reddit for hours and trying to figure out how much was necessary.
No, I mean, but there's something about how, if I should have marked it. Even just like really early in the story, I guess it's on the, yeah, I mean maybe like middle of the second page or so. There's just a very quick reference to like the gear
Mm,
being put in the fridge or something. And it's just like that. It was just those little moments where you're trusting readers, right? That you
mm,
don't need to, because in this world, that's like, this guy is not going to explain things, right? It's just very,
mm,
and like when we get to his apartment later, there's no explanation of what any of those drugs are, but we can figure out, I mean, obviously it's clear they're steroids, but we can figure out based upon the context what part of the cycle they are and all the different work that they're doing.
mm.
So I was just really fascinated by that. So um I wonder, I mean, you mentioned before about kind of how this story came about differently, but um, did it pose any other particular craft challenges? You mentioned like revision, having, writing it for a very particular like assignment essentially, and then revising it. But did it pose any particular challenges for you?
Yeah, I mean, like what writing doesn't
Yeah,
drive me crazy is the thing. Openings are always, I don't know when you get them right. I think you just get sick of them and are like, okay, I can't mess it up. Maybe I'll mess it up now. If it gets to the point where I'll mess it up, I have to stop, which almost never happens. Um, but I mean, you know, the opening's also kind of easy to write at the same time, in a sense that, I mean, it's a story. They're so relatively simple in what they do in an opening. It's like, okay, I have to have all my people there. It's a love story. I got to have the two people meeting, like in paragraph one, as close to paragraph one as possible. So, that makes it a little bit easier. I know for this one, really what really kind of was messing with my head was thinking, I wasn't sure if like the midpoint of the story, if there was enough tension, um, if there was enough of a like a stomp on the gas pedal, I guess, or enough of a scene that was like, okay, there's no turning back, you know. I know he gets hurt is like a very important part of this story, which kind of happens closer to the end than the beginning. You know, it's not a middle scene. And when I was revising that, thinking of it, just conceptualizing the story, I was constantly like, he should probably get hurt in the middle of the story. That feels like how a story would work. But when I was reading it over, I was like, I just like the midpoint scene where it was kind of quiet and they're just kind of talking. I think that's kind of like they're in the bar, and um, I just love that scene so much. And I don't know, I was like, this is enough tension. I think for me, this is something I you know like, so I should just go with it and not worry about cutting too much out to try to fit like a more traditional template, I guess.
Yeah,
Uh,
I want to actually that part of that scene I want to talk about in just a second, but I think his getting hurt does operate as kind of a hinge, though, right? Because
mhm,
you know it changes his mental state, right? He's now can't do the thing that he wants most to do. His dream, which I think we're supposed to kind of read as possible, but still probably still a dream, right? That it might not quite be in reach for him, but he's unwilling to
mhm,
let go. But this, is a clear moment where it for sure will not happen this year, and possibly even into the future, with that injury. So it's nice because it changes his mental state, and I think it's the point for me anyway. It's the point in the story where kind of all bets are off for him, right?
mhm,
He's been kind of trying to tiptoe around with Taya, and not, there's several points where he wants to not confront, but he wants to ask her about what she's doing and OnlyFans and all that, but he doesn't until he feels kind of like there's nothing else to lose. And I think that,
mhm.
though it may happen a little later in the story, that's I think I said hinge before, but more like a tipping point, right? After that
Yeah.
happens, the story momentum picks up. We know, like, okay, he's kind of, things are going downhill for him.
Mhm.
Which as readers, I think we get kind of excited because now we know, like, this something's going to come to a head, right?
Yeah.
And for me, I like this story because, as I said before, all the pieces are in place at the beginning, and it kind of tracks the way that we expect it to, not in a way that it's hitting every plot point exactly as we would expect it to, but it's moving in a direction that it seems like it needs to go, but yet it doesn't end in a way that I expect. Right? It
Mm.
doesn't. It doesn't. So it's doing this really cool work because it's like satisfying. As a reader, I'm satisfied because it's kind of doing some things I expect it to do, but it doesn't go so far as to end in a way that I see coming. Right? Like,
Mm.
we know that they're going to have to come together. We know there's going to have to be some kind of culminating moment at the end, but it doesn't unfold in a way that feels predictable. And
Mm.
I liked that was really a deft way to kind of manage reader expectations throughout the story. I
Cool.
really,
That's cool to hear. That's fun to hear.
so really quick, the scene on they're in the bar. It's at the end of I guess, like the third section if we're talking about page breaks, and um, it gets like strange in a really good way. It's after she's done the juggling, and she asks about what he does, and he's a bouncer, and she says, you think it would be nice to hit people for a living? And she goes on, and shows her she has some, like, injury, so she can't turn her arm completely. But by the end of that scene, after she's juggled, she asks this question: what if my arm was gone? Would you like me if I was an amputee? And that's something that comes up several times in the story, and it's just a very unsettling way to end that scene, in a good way,
Mm.
unsettling, sort of destabilizing way to end that scene. Um, what do you have anything to say? What was that like, figuring out that aspect of her? Because she asks about being an amputee, and then later she brings it back again, asking about being burned, right?
Yeah, yes,
Um,
yes.
and it's very weird. It's like she's kind of like, I don't know. It's kind of aggressive, right? And she's kind of like
Mm,
prodding him, and I don't know. Maybe that's where some of the gender issue. That's why I was like interested in that aspect that you mentioned at the very beginning, because it makes a lot of sense.
mm.
She's taking this kind of dominant sort of role and making him uncomfortable,
Yeah,
which is really really cool.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's like if I started with an idea right of the seed, it's like, okay, let's play with gender, have a huge bodybuilder guy. Okay, let's do the classic thing where we invert that and make him seem smaller to, let's add a character, who's even more masculine than that in a way that's interesting. Yeah, and she's just seeking perfection in her body. So, again, I think I'm always trying to think of, maybe not always trying to think, but I think it's helpful to think of just the classic like foil, characters doing A, okay, what's something they can do interesting? Okay, do the opposite, I guess, in a way. So her, fixation on like injuries and uh, just maybe slight the grotesque maybe is, it contrasts that perfection she's striving for really well. But more uh more this is probably maybe this makes the story more fun or less fun. I don't know. So my wife, she Olivia, she's a poet. She has we she's got a weird arm. One of her arms doesn't bend all the way, and she's always like, I can't flip these pancakes because of it or something. You know what I mean? She's always like making fun of herself in a way. Um, she figured it out when she was doing ballet when she was little. She couldn't do the move perfectly. And she was like, what the hell's wrong with my arm? It doesn't bend all the way. I have no idea what this is about. So, I mean, that's just what it is in the story is playing with this arm. And I mean, I'm just stealing all the time with whatever I write, right? If it's a setting I'm looking at, if it's Reddit post, if it's maybe a little bit of my real life I get in there. Um, that's what that's really coming from. And then, um, gosh, anytime anything's weird, it's good for a story, right? I mean, I am a huge fan of Murakami, and probably no surprise there. He is always just doing like these little weird things of dialogue that almost don't quite make sense, but you're like, I guess I buy it, right? And it's kind of flirting with magical all the time, almost, even if it's completely a realistic story. Um, I think maybe just the vibe or the tone that Murakami achieves, that really kind of slightly unsettling experience, is something that I just love it. So I try to strive for that all the time.
Yeah, I mean that's actually really that's instructive, I think, because the a lot of their dialogue is you know completely plausible, right? Nothing of particularly what Taya says is you know beyond the bounds of what someone would say, but a lot of it has just a little just a it's slightly askance or something, right? There's this feeling
Yeah.
of it of like, because I'm imagining like, you're meeting this person and you're out on a date and she asks, what if my arm was gone? Would you still like me if I was an amputee? Like what an odd question to ask.
Hmm.
And you get the sense that the narrator is answering it in ways that you know, he's trying, right? He's like, well, yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
and then when she goes on about being burned, and then she like pushes, like, what if it was my face? And then he finally admits, like, well, probably not. And it
Right. Yeah.
just something about that just really felt, I don't know, it was maybe one of the things in the story that kind of, you know, it rises up, right? It kind of,
Mm.
everything in the story is working well, and it's good. And then we got this oddness and this destabilization, this defamiliarization, and it kind of makes it, I don't know. As a reader, I'm kind of like arrested, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it's fun to write it like this because it's like, okay, I have, if you have two characters talking, right, there should be conflict. They
Yeah,
shouldn't really be agreeing. Um, but it's like, okay, I'm writing two characters, and I want them to have fun and potentially like okay, maybe they are in love, maybe they are having fun. And that's a little bit harder. I mean, it's easier to do conflict if it's like people are like, I don't know, like ready to combat each other over something. It's a little bit more interesting to do like more subtle conflict if it's like, okay, maybe they're in love, but or maybe he's in love with her, right? And they're having fun in a way, but it's like you also have to make it weird. Um, so yeah, I mean, that was also the most fun part writing. I think that was the most fun I had with it.
What about the ending? Maybe the last question I'll ask about specifically about the stories. How did this final scene shake out for you?
Man,
Um, if you
yeah, I'm so bad at writing a story ending where I never know where to actually end it. But I think I'm getting a lot better where I'm just like, no, just cut off the last few pages and end it on a concrete thing. Uh, that's kind of been what I've learned to do. Yeah, in an earlier draft, I had did a really poor job in that I didn't even write this wrestling scene. I was kind of like had them hint at it or like talk about it, and it was kind of implied that was going to happen, and then it didn't. There was kind of there's a more quiet ending, I guess, and it was just like, well, how did I mess that up in a how did I draft a story where they didn't wrestle, where there was like I was constantly telling the reader, yeah, this is gonna happen. That is beyond me. I don't know how, the mistakes we make drafting a story are always so freaking funny. Um,
in retrospect, yeah, yeah.
right. But I mean, it was just I really think if you're gonna the best way to end a story, honestly, is just kind of just a strong image, right? Whether it be just something the last paragraph the character kind of looks at and it allows the reader to have some, I don't know, thoughts about. There's a story by Chekhov called Gusev where like I think that's how you said the story, Gusev.
I think so.
It's a guy, he's on a boat and he's like dying, and then he finally does die, and they throw him off the boat, his corpse in a bag, and the corpse floats. And then you see like a shark going up to like the corpse, and you see like little fish, and it's such a weird detachment of the camera from the character. We've been following the character. We still follow the character at the end. The camera doesn't change that much, but it changes slightly enough to focus on these very unsettling images of a shark, right? Like investigating this corpse in the sea. Um, and he does that in like the last paragraph or two. And I think that's such a cool move. Just kind of ending on a really cool image, and I think that extends to just ending on a scene that's maybe got a lot of visuals, right? Just I don't know, just end something with the reader to look at that doesn't quite give them answers, where they just kind of can think about the story later on and be like, what really did happen there? Um, but yeah, I mean, this one was fun to write too, right? It's two people wrestling, and anytime, I mean, I mean, it's a weird scene, right? It's
Well, I really like too the when he asks to if she would crush. He said something like, "I'd ask you to crush a melon if I had any," and that's the moment where he reveals inadvertently that he had watched her OnlyFans right
right.
time, and then I don't know. There's something that's the transactional nature at the end. The he says, "Would you believe me if I said I think I love you?" Not at all. She said, "You're drunk." I finished my whiskey flavored melted ice, set my glass down. I'm serious. If you love me, you'll Venmo me the rest now before I leave. And there's just like what a I don't know, what a gut punch of
Mm,
him. And he likely is drunk here and he's emotional because of his injury and all of that. But just what a I don't know, that's a move at the end, I think, where we don't get any kind of um it's not it's not satisfying in the bad way of being satisfying, right? We don't get this, they don't end up together, or there's not even any suggestion that this is anything more than this transactional moment,
Hmm.
at least for her. And I don't know, I really like, as I was saying before, the way that some of those scenes kind of destabilize, this ending, you know, the story progresses to this space where we kind of know that they're going to be together in this final moment, but it ends in a way that I don't think I could have guessed, with that transactional bit, which I just found really, really satisfying in an unsatisfying way, the way that
Yeah.
literary fiction often leaves us, right?
Right, right. Yeah, that's always the goal, right? Not quite put a bow on it, but maybe put the ribbon on top of the,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Let us tie it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, you mentioned a few writers already, but I'm curious, I don't know if you've got a couple writers, or even stories or books, novels that are kind of touchstone for you, books that were really either foundational as you're developing as a writer, or ones that you return to.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I'm interested in that.
Yeah,
You mentioned
it's
Murakami already, so
yeah, I know. I'm like, I don't want to just say Murakami over it over, you know what I mean? Because it's not even true. Like, I think Murakami was really, really, really great for when I learned a bit about fiction in my MFA. That was a 2-year program, and I came out of there and I was like, okay, I can actually write a story that, counts as a story. Maybe not a story I like or love or anything, but it counts. But then I read a lot of Murakami, and he kind of helped me, get really excited about writing again. Um, and that energizing effect was really cool. And then since then, I mean, being here to FSU, right, is really just sitting down and reading. I mean, everyone you should read. I don't know the list, like, Cheever and Carver and Lahiri and, uh, geez, James Baldwin's stories. He's so good though. It's almost like I don't quite learn from him, because it's like I just don't, I can't do with that. It's almost like the Alice Munro effect, where it's like, yeah, I can learn how Alice Munro writes a story, but I don't think I can do those moves.
I can't make 40 years pass in a paragraph and
Yeah, yes,
not have
exactly.
anybody notice. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and jump between 3 different time periods of in
Yeah.
one page where it's going back and forth.
Yes. Some writers are, I would love to give students, but I don't, because, it's um, like I would love to give students, like Dennis Johnson, for example.
Hmm,
I don't very often, because I don't, what he does, or like what Monroe does or Baldwin, is so hard. They make it look so easy, and it's so
yeah,
hard. And it's like, I do the same thing with George Saunders.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
struggle to give students his stories because, like Sea Oak, for example, a zombie pops up. And I'm like, well, I'm just going to get a bunch of stories that have zombies appearing out of nowhere. And it's like, he can do it for all these
Yeah.
hard to define and articulate reasons that anyway.
Uh,
Yeah, there's
yeah.
those writers that are, I love, but I struggle, or I worry about giving them to students, because I'm not sure I'm able yet to articulate how this writer does that in a way that's
Hmm.
different than the way they might, why
Yeah, I
the
am
amateur writer might try.
I am in the same mindset. Like, I do like to teach Saunders, but maybe at the end, and maybe a very specific, like victory lap. I know I like to maybe teach at the very end, because it's doing such interesting point of view work, and it's like, okay, you guys should understand point of view enough by now that you can, maybe chew on this one and see how things go. But yeah, otherwise it's, I mean, I like Carver to teach Carver a lot, because it's he's just doing such, I don't know, he does such basic things well, and not that it's easy, right? So it's like what we talk about when we talk about love, where they're just having a conversation. I mean, I wouldn't want to try to write something like that, but just how he'll enter a new setting, and it will just be like 2 lines of description, right? There's a
Yeah,
bike on the doorstep, and it's like, okay, that's cool. Like, you can steal that, right?
I have pretty good luck teaching him, and I always have to make it clear that you don't have to like his style, but
Mhm.
the how much he's able to leave out. and
Yeah.
we don't even realize we miss it. Um,
Yeah.
because I get a lot of stories where students are describing like hair color and eye color and how tall somebody is, and it's like, those things usually don't matter.
Hmm.
And it's like in some of I teach like why don't we dance, or why don't you dance, and like viewfinder and those stories, and you know or neighbors, like we get, it's shocking how little information we get, and we don't even
Hmm.
realize we didn't get it because he's able to suggest things in a passing description. So yeah, it's just his subtlety, I think, is something that I try to convey to students. I don't know how well I do sometimes, but that's the idea.
Yeah, that impulse for people to give the hair color and the eye color,
Yeah.
and it's
And
such a
sometimes it really does matter. Like in your story, body really matters, right? So it
yeah,
makes sense to have that. But in a lot of stories, they're the fact that they have brown eyes doesn't really have any bearing on the story.
right, yeah.
So what about any writers that you think we should be reading? And these can be writers that, new writers, or writers that don't get read as much as they should.
Oh man, it's a hard question because it's you know, part of being a writer is right being like a good literary citizen and actually reading and purchasing books by writers and
Mhm.
but I mean, there's always so many books you haven't read in the canon, and they're also way cheaper, and the fun of reading can half the time be just buying the books and going to the Goodwill bookstore and picking things out. So I do admit I am I'm not the greatest reader of things that are being published today. I will say like Morgan Talty, if I'm saying his last name right. I'm so bad with names too. For some reason, I buy a book or I read a book. I don't really look. I just go to page one and I start going. I don't even remember titles. United of the Living Res was a cool collection I read recently. I'm currently looking at Gina Chung's work. She just published a short story collection called Green Frog, and she does some really cool, quiet stories. Um, that it's always impressive when I read a story where little happens on the surface. It's a very like maybe there's profound moments in a character's life if, that has a big impact on them, but as a reader you're kind of watching, it's like, oh, all they did was eat dinner, right? And if a writer can pull off a story like that and have me think about it the next day, it's always cool when she's able to do that. So I mean everyone's publishing cool stories. As far as some of my actual like favorite, I mean John Updike has got to be one of my favorites. His gosh, his use of like point of view is really cool. I don't know, just his sentences. Um, man, yeah. If a writer's got good sentences, right? It's that I just want to almost copy them and learn how to do them myself. I mean, that's the best.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, what are you working on? And what are you working on, if you don't mind talking about that? And then where else might we find more of your work?
Yeah. So I am currently working on a novel. It's going to be my dissertation. It was about a 500-page manuscript that I've gotten down to about 470 right now. So hopefully I can keep whittling it down a little bit, tightening it up. Um, it's the first novel that I actually finished. So it's very much, I mean, I think it's really cool, but I'm always afraid. I'm like, is this going to be the novel that taught me how to write a novel? That now I need to go write a novel. Now that I know how to write, I say I don't want to throw this one away. But it's basically, it's very much in the vein of, Updike and um, like Philip Roth and um, I don't know, all those like 1960 dudes. I always think of like Mad Men. It's kind of like in that vein of just a marriage story. Um, but I try to flip the 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 gender a little bit, have it where, maybe the husband, he's still kind of a slightly unlikable guy, kind of how those stories do, where they have these like husbands who are dissatisfied or whatnot, just these guys in the suburbs, right? Um, but I want the wife to be I want the wife to be a very powerful figure, and the other characters that interact with him to be really powerful. So it's very much in the vein of that. And then it's speculative as well. So I don't know. Have you ever watched like oh geez, Army of Darkness with very very dumb movie with
I think
it's
so.
Evil Dead
Been a
where
while, but yeah.
yeah so the guy from Evil Dead gets teleported back to medieval times and he has to fight like skeletons and whatnot. It's not quite like that. Okay, it's not as bad as that, but there's a portal that opens in this guy's house that he is renovating, um, and basically the portal has connections to 18th century or 19th century Florida. And there's a lot of stuff that I've done a lot of historical research on, like the Second Seminole War here in Florida. So it's kind of weaving between marriage story with shenanigans and then like historical um, work, which I think has been very serious, but it's been difficult. It's been really difficult to do the historical work and kind of shape it into a narrative that makes that's compelling for a reader. It's compelling for me. I can just read a guy's journal from 1837 and be like, wow, look at this. This is Vietnam that took place 200 years ago in my backyard. But that's not satisfying for the reader. The reader actually wants plot arcs and things like that.
Yeah.
So
It
surprising.
kind of reminds me a little bit of um I don't know that any specifics, but two things. First, J. Robert Lennon. He seems to do some stuff that's kind of
Mm,
like that. And then I had a professor during my master's. Um, he wrote a book called I think The Melancholy Fate of Meriwether Lewis. I think I may not be exactly right about that. Michael Pritchett is his name, and it has the dual narrative, and it's a guy in the present researching because I think Lewis and Clark. I think Lewis they've kind of gone back and I think he was like like uh, suffered from depression, I think, or maybe it was, I think, if I'm getting, it's been too many years. But anyway,
yeah, I feel like that is the thing that rings a bell.
yeah,
Yeah.
this guy in the present is like a high school history teacher or something, and he's fascinated and studies Lewis and Clark. And then the other narrative is Lewis on the
Mhm.
trail. And with using the his journals and all that kind of stuff, but thinking of it in terms of more of kind of like what his psychology was. And it's these two
Yeah.
little lines. And there's a couple places in the novel, I think, where they're kind of like quasi, not magical, but some moments where the two things sort of kind of the two storylines kind of cross in a kind of cool way. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly what I am
yeah,
doing.
that sounds like a really cool thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I need to read him, but then if I read him, I'll have to delete my stuff. And, damn it. Too
No,
late.
I think it's different enough, but
Yeah.
there's nothing magical about it. There's nothing like that. There's just some subtle moments where, where there's like a suggestion of some of that. But anyway, it was a pretty cool novel.
That sounds
Uh,
super cool.
all right, well, great, man. I appreciate the time. It was great talking about your story, and thanks for sending us such a great story. We're happy to publish it.
Yeah, thanks so much for everything. Thank you for, publishing it. It's been very it's been nice. I got it off my chest. I don't have to worry about it anymore.
Good, good.
Open the file and ever think about it. And
Glad we could help.
all
So
right.
you can find Victory Pose in the spring 24 issue of SIR. You can go to usi.edu/SIR to find out how to get a copy. The link will also be in the description below, along with Tom's bio and links to his website and all of that too.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Well,
Cool.
thank you very much, Tom. It was great talking with you.
Thank you.
All right.
Appreciate
We'll
it.
see everybody on the next one.